Okay, you're ready to go.
I call this February 18th, 2025 P&Z work session meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. Let's have, I guess we just move right into staff comments.
Yeah, we'll just jump right into the work session packet. So the first item that we're going to discuss is the draft ordinance to the changes to the efficiency apartments. It's primarily the same draft that we presented to City Council at our joint work session. However, given feedback from our previous work sessions about utility concerns, we did talk to the Public Works Director and made some adjustments to the definition of a detached accessory dwelling unit, that it would be required to have its own water, sewer, and electric lines. And in further discussion with the Public Works Director, I'll just pass out some additional proposed language here, but he was saying that it can be complicated and a challenge to, in every instance, to require the owner to connect to a separate water and sewer line if they're going to have the same address, because always the utilities are linked to an address. And so he gave an example of someone that he does know of that has 2 sewer lines, but he thinks that they're only being charged for one because they just don't have a way to, anyway. So there can be some complications. And so he was saying that he doesn't have any concerns if a detached accessory dwelling unit is connected to the main house's water or sewer line, but he said in instances where the lot could be subdivided, that would be of more concern. So I drafted 2 other proposed languages. The first one is just kind of specifying, lots larger than 6,000 square feet south of Phoenix Road would require their own water, sewer, and electric lines, and then lots larger than 12,000 square feet or more north of Phoenix Road would require their own lines, utility lines. And that's just because anything smaller than those sizes can't be subdivided anyway, so there's no concern there. But then the second one is maybe just a little bit more, I guess, flexible in the sense that we can't pinpoint every situation, so just wrote it in this to specify that a detached accessory dwelling unit must be connected to its own utility lines if the property has any potential to be subdivided. Anyway, so those are just 2 options there for the commission to discuss what you think would be best, and maybe I'll just pause there to let you discuss that, and then we can go over the other parts of the draft ordinance.
Would the commission like a moment to think about this?
Yes.
A couple minutes? Let's take,
Just trying to get my bearings. The Phoenix Road that I know of runs north and south.
where it intersects the Seward Highway.
Yeah, so right there across from like Port Avenue essentially is the...
Oh, yes. Okay, it runs east-west, then moves north-south. There we go. Yeah, okay.
Let's just take a couple minutes to think about this.
These are 2 different options, right?
I mean, you can do 3 different options if you just want to do a blanket, all detached. The one that's in the packet, all detached accessory dwelling units have to be on their own water, sewer, and electric lines, but
That's pretty hard.
yeah,
That's like expensive.
Well,
I'm not quite done
I'm not
thinking.
quite there.
You're not-
Can we have a moment of silence?
Yes.
So we can actually think about this?
Moment.
A moment, yes. I am done thinking. Thank you. What are the wishes of the commission on this proposal?
Well, so if there's 2 dwellings on a large lot and they use the same water and sewer, we subdivide it, we might not get the information that they're using the same line. But I know that if they subdivide it to sell it, the bank's not going to loan using the same line. They're going to want their own. So I'm just trying to think of, is it our area to do something, to enforce something that if a person thinks they want to sell, they need to think in the future and plan for that? Or should we just, let them, should we put the information in there and force them to do it so that when they go to subdivide, it's clean? Or should we not worry about it because they should be thinking about their future?
I would suggest that if they choose to do it themselves, and we allow them to do it themselves, to be attached to the one thing, that the caveat has to be part of the, when they put the ADU in, that if you choose to do this, you will have to subdivide it to, if you choose to subdivide it, then you're going to have to split it out. And then that will give them the option at that time to say, well, maybe I need to go ahead and do this anyway because I eventually will plan to sell this off, or because it's subdivided, or I'm not doing anything with it, I'm just going to leave it as it is. But if we provide the information as opposed to forcing their hand, maybe we can go that route. I don't know how you put that in, just the instructions, if you put that in the in code, so
It could be
clear.
a plat note. A plat note,
Okay.
which is a legal requirement.
Oh,
A note on the plat. If
Mhm.
this property is subdivided, then utilities must be separated out.
I think that's
does
pretty
it.
fair. Yeah.
Several properties in Seward have sold for cash because the banks won't lend on them. They're, old structures. So I think the intent of our Public Works Director is to make sure that it doesn't turn into a mess in the future, that we don't start out allowing, just a little extension cord here and a water
Got all
line
those,
here,
yeah.
a hose, just so that you are creating a habitable dwelling.
Mhm.
And in city, except for certain areas like across the bay, we do require city water, sewer, and electric,
Right.
especially water and sewer. I guess you can say no to electric, but water and sewer is required. So that's, I believe, the intent of the Public Works Director is to keep it clean from the start. Let's just start out clean, have it separated. So we have 3 options. We can go with what was originally proposed, which was, and with its own water, sewer, and electric line separate from the primary dwelling. That's
Pretty cut and dry.
clean. Yeah,
Mhm.
kind of like that. And there are lots south of Phoenix and the Seward Highway that are larger than 30 by 100, that are platted larger than 30 by 100. So to base it on that, just because most of this area was platted with 30 by 100 doesn't mean it is now. So I actually think this first one does exactly what the Public Works Director intends, and it just is real clean and easy. We don't have to deal with plat notes, worry about the bank or cash, or where they are north or south of the magic line.
I guess you could also argue the fact if you're willing to put an additional dwelling unit on there, you might as well go the extra mile to make sure it's a standalone if you're going to do that and just make it clean.
But does this, how it's written, allow to keep it on the same water and sewer for both buildings?
It's separate
Yeah.
for a
Yeah, it's
not
detached. If it's
So
attached,
don't we want, I'm sorry, don't we
Yeah.
want to allow them to be able to keep it on the same water and sewer as an option?
Yeah, and the Public Works Director said that because this was our verbiage that we created, after the last meeting of discussing the potential complications. And when the Public Works Director saw it, he said this verbiage in the packet is probably maybe too stringent
Right.
and could create some complications and some unnecessary burdens financially on people. And so he was more open to having some flexibility where we could look at a lot in a situation and say, okay, is the location of this detached structure and the size of the lot going to present a possibility of subdividing in the future where this building could be on its own lot? If yes, then yes, you need to be on separate. But if it's like, you know, behind the house, it's never going to be, there's no way you can cut this lot up in any way, shape, or form to make it its own, on its own parcel, then go ahead, connect to the
main
the
house.
primary
Yeah.
main house.
Yeah, I'm with him on that. And like, we've been talking about, you know, accessory dwelling units as mother-in-law suites, and, you know, I haven't heard much about the potential or plan to subdivide and split the lot and sell. I realize it's relevant now, but I think it's important to keep it easy for property owners to, you know, not have to spend extra money, keep their lines together in those scenarios that you're saying too.
How quickly, I'm not as familiar with lot notes. I mean, is that? Plat notes, is
On
that?
the plat.
Yeah, is that, you know, is that something a normal, you know, you would wind up, you know, somebody who wants to subdivide will absolutely see that, so if they're going to do that,
The title company
Well-
would say, did you know there's a plat note on here? It's a restriction on what you can do with your property. They'd say, oh, but now I find out if I subdivide, I have to separate the utility lines.
So is that's mandatory anyway with subdividing, right?
The title search?
To have separate
Yeah.
water and sewer.
Yeah, if
Yeah,
you're gonna
that would be-
subdivide, you wanna have separate water and sewer anyway, right?
yeah.
Like, have to.
Oh, we could get stuck in a spot where somebody could if administration can, if I'm wrong, can cut in, but I can see something happening here where a lot comes to us to you know, split it,
Yeah.
and it gets missed in the notes somehow that those houses are using the same utilities.
Right.
Because a lot of times we don't get where the utilities are for that
Yeah.
house. So it's
Yeah.
like, I want to split these lots. So we look at it and say, okay, your setbacks are fine, you're in an area, everything's acceptable. Boom, we split it. And now somebody's using somebody else's utilities.
Yeah.
And then somebody's stuck with something they can't get a loan on.
I mean, that's like an important thing about house property sales, to determine that and have that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that what we're dealing with even here? I mean, I just think, so
Okay, I wanna present a scenario. Oh, I'm sorry, Sean.
I'm done.
Actually, I'm supposed to acknowledge you
Okay.
even in a work session, okay? But I can call you Rhonda.
So, say you go and you buy this property, you set up a detached dwelling unit, or you have this property, you set up a detached dwelling unit, in the future you want to sell it. And then you realize, oh, I can actually subdivide this and I could just sell this part of it, you know, and whether, when you meet the criteria of 6,000 or 12,000 square foot lot, I could sell this part of it and keep my own property, right? Before that though, you had both units on the same utility. You split it up, you sell it, because the plat notes are there, it says you could subdivide it. At that point, then you split off the utilities, right? That's pretty much what this is saying, at that point. But initially, if you're owning the property and you go ahead and make this detached dwelling unit, you don't necessarily have to have a separate utility, even though, like you said, you need a kind of a separate address to have that anyway, right?
So with these three options, it would be requiring someone to put in the separate utilities before any
They put
sort
the
of
detached unit.
property is divided. What the commission is discussing though is that consideration of should we make this requirement or perhaps just leave it to the owner when they subdivide the property potentially, or if that's a possibility, that they will then just put in the utilities because that's what makes sense and will be required by the lenders and all of those.
Right. Because I've noticed as these things mature and as a dense, excuse me, I'll continue on, in the densely populated like Seattle or wherever, they end up actually selling that detached unit, and that detached unit can sell several different times And it becomes more like it's like a condo association sort of thing with 2 units, because they're on the same, bordering on the same property. So, but they do ultimately have, or will have, will be on their own utility, water, sewer, electrical meter.
So, Chair Griswold, if I can respond to Commissioner Hubbard. So what you're telling me is, I think it's what we're talking about, is, they may be sharing it together and all the rest of that stuff is initially, but if they sell it off, then it's mandated that they create the same, they get their own utilities and stuff on there. So that's what I'm thinking. We're already, we're discussing a little bit on that. So I think what you were saying is what we're trying to fully resolve. Should we make sure that the individual knows ahead of time, or should we mandate it right off the bat?
Mandate what?
If you're going to put an ADU in there, are you going to specifically, you're going to tell them that they got to do their own utilities ahead of time?
You're going to put a DADU in there, a detached.
Detached ADU, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like that idea from the start.
Yeah, you need to let them know.
What would-
If they're gonna subdivide, right?
Yeah, if they're going to subdivide.
If they're gonna subdivide.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. What Seward has, unfortunately, and many people know, properties have their neighbors' water lines, sewer lines going through their property, and they're like, I can't do anything because your water line, your sewer line is going diagonal through my property. A lot of it in Forest Acres especially, your neighborhood where the Army just did what they did, and then they said, Sarnoya, here it is, and people go, God, why?
Or they're
Why did this
backing
happen?
up, their sewer's backing up.
Oh, yeah,
They
then
get
you
to it,
find
they have to
out.
go into the neighbor's yard,
So,
and, yeah, it's a mess.
So I would like to, going forward in the 21st century, not to let that happen. So it just seems the person wants to have this dwelling, detached dwelling on their property, and they should be the ones that make it legal. Instead of selling it and say, oh, by the way, you get stuck with this bill because I'm gonna live here,
And you'll have
you
to put
just
in your
bought a
own
property
utilities, yeah. Well,
with
that'd
a
be
huge liability.
Yeah.
So, which of these 3 scenarios would satisfy Doug and prevent issues?
If I may?
Yes.
I think the second option of the ones we passed out, I mean, both of these kind of get at the same thing. Essentially, this language finds that sweet spot of not creating unnecessary financial burden for a detached ADU on a property that could never be subdivided due to its size, while requiring utility lines on a detached ADU on properties that do have the potential to be subdivided.
Okay.
Okay.
And that potential is a pretty clear thing to determine.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
lot size.
Cool, yeah, I like that one. That's
Lot
what I put.
size and lot coverage.
That makes sense.
That's good.
So
Yeah.
we like the second one on the handout? Does
Yep.
that sound good?
Yep. Number
Okay.
2.
Yes.
Thank Doug for his input, because we really appreciate input like that. Okay, any other thoughts about ADUs?
So if I may, Chair Griswold,
Sure.
walk through some other changes. On the land uses allowed table on page 8 and 9, the only change that I made from the draft ordinance that was presented to City Council was that I changed the use in central business district to conditional use permit. And I simply made that change because a single family dwelling requires a conditional use permit in the central business. So it would,
But this is a new use. They weren't allowed to have an efficiency apartment
They weren't.
before.
no, yeah.
So this also means, well, central business district doesn't have parking requirements,
And
but a
that's,
single-family home does.
and that's another reason why I think it's important to have a conditional use permit for the accessory and, well, yeah, attached and detached accessory dwelling units for the parking.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that makes
Okay.
sense. We can put in a condition
there.
for parking,
Right,
just like we've done for a couple things.
okay, that sounds good. And that applies to the next page as well, where a detached unit
Right.
also needs a CUP. Okay.
And then the only other thing that I added was the parking portion of code that pertained, and I didn't change the requirements, I just updated the language from
Right.
efficiency department to accessory dwelling unit.
Yep.
My concern with that is we spent a lot of time on previous work sessions discussing other developmental requirements. And an efficiency apartment is a one inhabitable room that requires one parking space. So we're creating basically a multi-family dwelling, I think. And if you look up on that page 10, a multi-family dwelling requires 2 parking spaces per dwelling, plus a half a space for every unit larger than 2 bedrooms, or greater than 1,000 square feet in size. So I'm kind of leaning towards defining how big an ADU could be. I don't see this in this ordinance.
Another potential to that, we could change the requirement for parking to just 1 space per room. Since it seems like the concern is the number of bedrooms now is not being controlled with an accessory dwelling unit. But if you look at the parking requirement for lodging, it's 1 space per guest room. And so that we could mirror that for accessory dwelling units. So if you have a 2-bedroom accessory dwelling unit, now you have to have 2 parking spaces. But if you have a 1-bedroom, then just 1 parking space. Just because the issue with defining the size of a accessory dwelling unit just gets really complicated versus just making sure that it's less than the total square footage of the primary dwelling.
Yeah, I agree. I like that. It's easier.
1 per bedroom?
Yeah.
It's easier to just like write it out, but it gets gets everything down that we're looking for. And
Okay.
make sure that we don't have a large structure with a family trying to share one spot.
What does the rest of the commission think? Does that sound reasonable?
I disagree. Not surprising.
Okay.
All of the research I've looked into for accessory dwelling units basically says that they use way less parking than your average. And since I believe we already have too much parking in the city to begin with, I don't think putting the burden of requiring even more parking for people is going to help people build accessory dwelling units. The end result I'm looking for is to make this easier, not harder for people to do. And so one of the main things that my research into this has led me to is put as few restrictions on the accessory dwelling units as possible, and parking is one of the big sticking points. Requiring lots of parking will make none of these be built.
I think,
Okay.
I disagree, but I don't. I think that what you're reading and where you're finding research, your data might make sense in other areas, but I also think that where we live kind of creates more items. I've spent a lot of time looking at parking around the small apartments in town here, and quite often I see a small apartment with 1 boat, 1 side-by-side, 1 truck behind it, and 1 car on the street. I've seen much more items that maybe a normal city somewhere else might not have. I feel like that we're prone to having more toys / items that we want to put in our parking spots. And so I don't think that we should adhere to that, because they end up bleeding onto the street, they end up double parking amongst themselves, they end up bleeding into the neighbor's spot. These apartment spots that we have around town, their lots are pretty full, and some of them cars are double parked behind each other. So, while that might work some places, I don't agree with it working here that way. I mean, one of the places I went to had 4 items and 2 spots. And I don't think they had 2 spots allotted to them. At least they were one single apartment.
We're not, we're not really a pedestrian, bicycle, unfortunately, oriented area. People need cars. They have cars, they have 3 cars, whatever. But I think it is reasonable to follow our current code for the multifamily dwellings, or just do 1 car per bedroom. Where I was actually thinking one for every unit larger than 1 bedroom. Because I don't know how many bedrooms these guys are going to have. Do you remember this? This is from our work session on November 19th. You kindly provided, administration provided all these comparisons to code. And that's where I got a lot of my condensed ideas. And also I was wondering, will we have a separate unit, a separate section in our code that lays out these other development requirements that other codes have? I really would like to see it spelled out more than just in the definition. And so, parking, 1 space for a studio, 1 bedroom ADU, 2 spaces for a 2-bedroom ADU, and the parking site plan required for building permit, if required, or CUP. That's where I'm heading, and that's gleaned from these other communities, at least the ones that I liked. So based on the number of bedrooms, and I guess, are there more than 2 bedrooms? How big is an ADU? We don't really define it.
I guess most are probably going to be between 1 and 2.
Yeah, we guess, but we don't know. So that's what I'm thinking for parking. I do know that people park on the street because they filled up their lots with stuff. They filled up their garages with stuff. They don't really have a garage anymore, so they park in the driveway or in the street. And
I think also,
especially
too,
downtown, it's so congested.
Oh, it is, very much so. I think also, too, because we're in a cold weather climate, people are more inclined to drive. If it was a warmer climate, people would be on bikes or Vespas or whatever else and stuff like this, but I just know where, we're at the Legion, the apartment complex next to us is constantly overflowing into our area, and they are stacking amongst themselves. So it's unfortunate. It would be nice for people to be walking more, to be healthier, but it is cold and doesn't always work.
Right.
If I may.
Yes, you may.
I don't want this to be all about parking, but I think it is important to talk about it, and I want to say that just because we are a cold weather climate does not necessarily mean that people only drive. We live in America, and people drive here because they have no choice, because all we do is build out car infrastructure. If you go to Europe, there are plenty of towns in the Arctic Circle even that are bike friendly, pedestrian friendly. People do walk outside. We have villages in Alaska where many people walk or, around. Seward is not necessarily a friendly pedestrian city, but if we stop requiring everybody to have space for a car, making car ownership a requirement instead of an option, then we're going to continue to require people to have cars and car ownership. I mean, you get what you build for, and right now our regulations build for just cars. There's no requirement for you to have boat parking. There's no requirement for you to have bicycle parking. There is a requirement to have car parking. Just think about that.
I appreciate those thoughts. We are talking about allowing another structure on a lot So where maybe they used to store their RV, now they've got a dwelling. And it's separate family with their separate stuff. And I think it's just gonna be really crowded unless we require parking. And if they don't have a car, they can park their bikes and their kayaks and other stuff there, I don't know. I think it's important to reserve that space.
If we reserve it, they don't necessarily have to use it for cars.
Correct.
It just has to be reserved for it.
Mhm.
If they don't have 2 cars, like you said, they could park one and do something else with the space. But if we do require it, then they end up, if they do have it, they end up using it. But for cars, but if they don't have not that many cars, they can use something else.
And if they have parking and they're parking in the street, enforcement can say, you know, we're gonna plow, move your car, and they'll have a place to put it. I think it's forward thinking, actually. And then as our town becomes more pedestrian friendly, we could change the code then, but I think it's gonna be a long time.
I think it brings up a good point about parking. I know that's been on our list for a coming discussion. It's obviously a big one. It's come up in a variety of topics. These are good points by Brennan. I think Seward has the potential to be a walkable city. You know, I don't know the percentage of people who live downtown and work downtown, but just like right down here, you know, now you got the bit of a public transportation going on with that bus service, right? So, I don't know. I like his point about what you plan for, you know, what you get, what you build for. I think the upcoming parking discussions are interesting and important to have.
So does that give you some idea? We don't all have to say the same thing, but that gives you an idea. We do have to keep moving on. Would that be all right to keep moving on? Did you have another comment, Rhonda?
Yeah, I do. So is the parking going to be a separate discussion eventually? Or is it something that we, as far as the ADUs go and the DADUs, we have to kind of agree or disagree? Or can we come back and when we do an overall comprehensive parking plan, we could readdress this?
That's up to the commission. It will be in the ordinance to at least update the terminology there for parking, but it is in the priorities for the commission to discuss parking requirements this year. So if the majority of the commission doesn't want to change the parking requirement right now for efficiency apartment accessory dwelling units, we can just change the terminology and then address it later when we have more conversations about parking.
I would prefer that we discuss it now as we introduce detached and attached dwelling units and replace the efficiency apartment concept.
So just for those 2 items, because I have a different opinion about hotels and.
Correct. We're just talking about ADUs now. Okay.
Yeah, so just as a follow-up, Alaskans have a different lifestyle and we're active. We have a lot of different types of vehicles and we're in desperate need always of covered storage because of our climate. And I mean, like right now, I'm driving around the neighborhood and seeing campers that are obviously being occupied. I don't think that's legal, is it? Or that's not, yeah. So, but anyway, you have this need for a lot of covered storage, and I don't think people would necessarily want a car if they could help it. I mean, sometimes it's expensive, but in Seward and to get around in the winter, we're lacking taxis in the winter.
Yeah.
And even in the summer, there is a difference between our resident community and our visitor community and how they would get around or what the parking requirements would be for them. But we do need to have probably more off-street parking for our dwelling units, or as much as possible, but not excessive.
Do you think 1 per bedroom sounds reasonable?
Yeah, or say like 2 for every 3 bedrooms or something like
Well,
that.
how big is this ADU going to be?
Yeah.
That's my question.
It's supposed to be smaller than the primary residence.
Yeah, subordinate
Right.
size.
But we don't know by how much, like a foot. It's very vague to me.
It's just
But-
putting this
I mean,
one
what is
per-
what is the typical ADU?
I like
One
what
bedroom?
it says there, though, that the
Probably,
2
right.
parking spots per dwelling,
But they
plus
wanted it larger for 2.
half the space after that, so you'd have 3 spaces per 4 bedrooms. Is that correct? Is that how that would
Sorry,
come out? If there were 4 bedrooms, you'd have 4 spaces, but that's a pretty big ADU too. Or that's, yeah. Or no, those for family units.
Yeah, the ADU is down a little lower.
In this compendium of developmental regulations, you probably remember, most communities support small ADUs to fit in the character of the residential neighborhood in town. Some said a structure 575 to 725 square feet, depending on the zoning district. A structure maximum of 800 square feet or 40 to 80% of the principal dwelling, whichever is smaller. That is a little more flexible. Structure minimum 300 feet, which is extremely small. Maximum of 900 square feet. Can't be larger than 40% of the principal dwelling. 1 structure per lot, maximum height, and zoning district setback requirements. So those are some numbers that I think should be in our code, so we actually know what we're talking about. I can't envision a 4-bedroom ADU. I just
Right.
don't,
Seems
that doesn't sound like an
No.
ADU.
No.
So I would support a maximum of 900 square feet is really generous. Or it can't be larger than 40%, and can't be larger than 40% of the principal dwelling. So, I don't know, if the bigger lot you have, the bigger your house, the bigger the ADU can be. But it should still be small enough so that it fits in.
Well, it's also based on, depending on how big your lot is, that, if your house is only so big, you can only
Right.
take 40% of that.
Right.
So you're sort of covered there, I think.
Bigger the lot, bigger the house.
If
Yeah, it kind of works
Mhm.
backward. You have to have a really big lot.
Or have a
If you have a
really
really
big
big house, to make that lot requirement, you'd have to have smaller.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I would really like to see some numbers for our development requirements that follow along these other codes and not just smaller than the primary dwelling. That's just so vague to me.
True. We had that discussion earlier, whether we're gonna go with lot percent coverage and setback, or we're gonna go with that.
Right. Well, we have to go with the must comply with the zoning district
Yeah.
setbacks and 1 structure per lot. That's covered in this.
Yeah.
But how big should they be, and should it be a percentage of the principal dwelling? 80% is still a pretty big one. Brendan?
I think the language is good, that keeps it vague, because, once again, we want to make this easy for people to do. And if we're going to try to put too many restrictions on it, once again, there's going to be Seward's full of diverse housing, like all kinds of sizes. And if we try to narrow down too much on a number, then we're going to end up excluding a lot of people, I feel like, and preventing them from being able to do this. And so I think having the language of just subservient to the primary dwelling is fine. Actually, I mean, I would say that's even very restrictive in itself, because I think we have language already that we know what the character of the town is. It's in what's already in the land use that we have, like you said, the setbacks, the percent lot coverage. That is the character you're talking about. So if somebody's building within those constraints, I don't really have a problem with whatever size it is. Because anybody can come in. The idea is, if you had all the money in the world, you can go into any lot and maximize those requirements, right? But that's not going to happen. People don't have infinite money, so we should just let them build out their property to the best of their financial ability.
Thank you. Without riffling through all my notes, is it still required to be lower than the principal structure? Is that one of the requirements?
When you say lower, do you mean,
Roof height.
Subordinate and then
Height of the
size.
If I remember correctly. when
Or
we
not,
did-
not lower than the principal dwelling, but in our development table, it says maximum height 34 feet and accessory building
think they're
is-
20.
yeah, so it would fall under, it would
So that'd be
qualify
an
as,
accessory building, so that's already taken care of. So does the commission feel that our current code that has a height limit for an accessory building, has setback requirements, has lot coverage, probably some other things, does that satisfy all we need to know about a detached accessory dwelling? Will we end up, and it's subservient, this new code says it's subordinate.
Small.
So does that satisfy without getting into what the other many towns have done about regulating square footage or percentage? Does that make
I think
it
that works.
still
Yes.
happen?
I'm okay
I'm
with
happy
that.
with that.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. Okay, let's see what I had here.
And for parking, we're looking at one space per unit, right? Is that what we're proposing?
That, it's just changing the name. It's not adding it, requiring a difference. It was one for efficiency apartment, you just changed the name to accessory dwelling unit, unless the commission wants to drop that off altogether, but I think just the general conversation was we were gonna keep it as it is.
Yeah, one space per unit.
Okay,
I don't know.
so
Is that-
just to be clear, if you have a home with 3 bedrooms and an accessory dwelling unit, you need 3.5 spaces. Am I correct? Is that how it reads?
You're
Whole property?
reading the whole property?
The whole
For your
thing.
whole property,
the single-family home would require 2
Single-family-
spaces.
right? Plus, it has
And
3
then-
bedrooms, so plus a half.
No, just a single-family home just requires 2 spaces flat.
That additional half space is for multifamily dwellings?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, right, okay,
And then a spot for the ADU, so 3 total.
okay.
No matter how many bedrooms it
I still like one per room myself.
Okay, so you're gonna need 3 spaces then? Yeah. Okay.
I think unit's good, but
Yeah.
I'm not like so stuck on it. Just kind of
Are we gonna have
keeps
a
it simple.
Yeah. Are we gonna have a problem with getting rid of efficiency apartment? Because don't we still have that terminology for certain buildings around town? Striking that here, do we need a different?
It
Section.
will be an attached accessory dwelling unit, so that just slides right in.
Okay.
The other development requirements were lot. So the lot must meet the minimum lot size, check. The lot must be served by a publicly maintained right-of-way and cannot be constructed on lots accessed through easements. I kind of like that because there's some areas in town that we need to work on. You don't have access to a right-of-way unless it's like Clearview. I'm thinking of that, what we think of as an alley. It's not, people own it. If the guy behind the one fronting Resurrection Boulevard wanted to do an ADU in his backyard, he would have to trespass across his neighbors to get there. So that's not good. So that's a problem that we need to resolve. It's been on the list for 100 years, but I would like to include that they can't be constructed on lots accessed through easements. And then the addition of ADU cannot exceed the maximum lot coverage. I believe that's
Right. I
clear.
think it's good.
Okay. The other ones they did were occupancy. So this code,
Where are you reading from? I'm sorry, Carol.
I'm
Oh, on your-
taking
on your
notes
right
from
notes.
this.
What's that?
So I'm reading from my notes.
Oh, your notes.
So long-term rental units only, which is sort of the idea. And by code, we do not allow short-term rentals in RR, R1, R2, R3, or UR. So anyone that built a detached or attached, no, a detached ADU in those residential zones could only do long-term rentals, not short-term. So that's good for us. But short-term rentals and long-term rentals could still occur in office residential, auto commercial, and central business. So we just need to be aware of that. Those commercial zones, we have decided you could have short-term rentals. So we are probably going to see development of detached ADUs.
In those areas.
And short-term rentals. So just to note that. And my question was, can an attached ADU be used as a B&B? And our code for B&B is pretty flimsy, but it's all about, no guest cookings in the bedrooms, and up to 50% of the bedrooms can be rented for B&B. But what if you have an efficiency apartment, which is now called an attached ADU? Could that be used for a B&B?
I'm assuming yes.
Do you think?
So the lodging requirements are that the primary dwelling needs to be owner occupied, and then whatever room, whatever space is used for short-term rental may only be 30% of the total square footage of all buildings on the property, and no more than 3 bedrooms, or 50% of all the bedrooms with a max of 3.
So it doesn't really matter that it's its own individual unit, separate. Because an attached ADU is separated from the rest of the house. But that's okay to rent it as a B&B. In which case it's a short-term rental,
Right.
where we don't want to. Okay, little loophole there, I think.
I think we're just giving people options.
Yes, but this is about housing, not B&Bs and making money. And the permitting process, a site plan including a parking plan was required and a building permit. Would that be required?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then the connection to the city water, sewer, and electric. However, if you're not on city sewer, you would need approval of DEC that the wastewater disposal system can handle the additional use from the ADU. I would like to include that because, for example, we have a planned unit development across the bay that does not have access to sewer. So if they wanted to do ADUs, as they might in city limits, they would have to be sure that the additional unit would be approved by DEC. Is that something we need to worry about, or they would worry about
I
it?
think we're a little ahead of that.
Yeah, we can follow up with Public Works Director and
See what
see
he
what
thinks.
process is in place
Yeah.
for that, yeah.
Just trying to,
Yeah, that makes
Head it
sense.
off.
We just need to figure out who's in charge of that.
right, and maybe it's under some, I don't know what that's under. But anyway, that's all the notes I had. Does that give you enough information to move forward? Does any other commissioner have any other comments about ADUs? Okay. Audience, do you have any comments about ADUs, attached or detached? Okay. So now,
Griswold,
go ahead.
just may I ask, so is it the wishes of the commission that we bring this to your next meeting in resolution form? Or does the commission want another work session?
I'm fine with resolution form.
Yeah.
I guess we can amend the resolution. It is always nice to see it, but we can speed the process up by just amending the resolution if we need to.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's pretty dialed in.
I hope so.
You can beat this to death if you really work on
I
here.
know it. So, and we need information from Public Works, because we are certainly not experts on any of that stuff. But our goal, of course, is to provide housing, let people, make better use of their lots and have it be to code, so that it's not a problem in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. That was a good discussion. So next on the agenda is a discussion on building heights, I believe. And what would the administration like to take that away?
Yeah, just briefly, we included pictures of the zoning map in the packet and zoomed in areas within Seward for the commission to look at. Of course, it's probably easier to just pull up on your laptops the zoning map and zoom around in. But the work session tonight was to discuss areas where the commission felt overlay districts would be appropriate for allowing building heights up to 38 feet and 48 feet. And I included some pictures in the back of the packet of views from certain areas that were discussed in past work sessions. And I'll just point out on the very last page, because this was a question in a previous work session, but the two tallest structures currently in Seward are the Connex building out in SMIC, which is 46 feet, and then the vessel maintenance and repair structure, which is 110 feet. And the other two structures that required a variance are the Sea Life Center at 40 feet and then the petroleum tanks at 40 feet as well. So just for comparison.
Thank you very much. I noticed that, well, we had a work session previously going through the municipal land use plan to discuss city property. And we didn't find many that were appropriate, but did find a few. I noticed that these pictures go onto private property.
Right, because this
Can you
is
explain that?
this is discussing where overlay districts would be appropriate for building height. Our muni land discussion was to determine areas of land that would be appropriate for housing. So this is a different conversation. So
Okay,
the building height overlay can be placed over privately owned land. It's essentially just saying, in this area of land, you now are permitted to build up to 38 feet or
Okay.
48 feet.
okay. So I'm a little confused, if you could help me clarify this. Researching overlay zones, it's an additional zone laid on top of an existing zoning district. So it's okay to say this district can have taller buildings, even though it's not a use. We couldn't add a use. Like, when I was looking at this, I was thinking, okay, what housing could we put here? You got a lot of industrial, well, we could put bunkhouses there. They could be tall bunkhouses. In resource management, we could have apartments. They could be tall apartments, multifamily dwellings. But it seems that they go hand in hand, where whatever zone it is, you're restricted by those uses. So where do we want to put housing? And we had no input from the public, as far as I remember, that I want the ability to build a taller house. You know, boom, boom, that was really important. It wasn't, but the two hoteliers came and, you know, maybe three, really wanted the ability to have a taller hotel. And so that, having a taller hotel would mean more rooms, and maybe that would free up houses to let people live there instead of renting them or whatever.
So
So
if
they go hand in hand.
I may, Chair Griswold, if we're wanting to look at specific location where we have received interest and specific input on, would be the area of land where we are discussing where we discussed a land swap with the city, so just
Right.
north of Hemlock Avenue, which was also an area that the commission mentioned would be appropriate for a building height overlay. So the developer has communicated with us that they do plan on building multifamily dwellings on a portion of this property. They hope to build units of, well, multiple buildings of up to 12 units, and they would, it would help their development plans if this was considered an area where building height could be raised to accommodate a 4-story building, so that they can provide as many units as possible, as many housing units as possible there.
So that would be where the boat storage was approved? Okay. And you're saying that piece of land that the city owns, that triangle, is still under negotiation for a land swap? Okay, so a lot of moving pieces here, but that's the goal, do the land swap, and then he builds tall multifamily apartments. Okay, can you guys visualize that? Does that sound like a good spot? The only thing I can think of is the airport's really close. very close. And that's
Not only the approach. You kind of come down north of that and turn right over the river. Yeah.
When I'm driving down Airport Road approaching that intersection, I can see them go right overhead.
True, but that's something that they'd have to work out with.
Okay.
Like,
I do remember Public Works expressed concern that, it's aiming right towards that property.
Is this something that FAA would
yeah,
need to be
just about
contacted
say.
on? Well,
I don't think
Probably.
it's in their designated approach. I don't know how far it goes in. But that's just something to think about, we need more information maybe before we make something that's gonna snag a plane.
That's a good point. I mean, you can go 34 right now,
Right.
so
it's not a
That's something to-
comfortable third
that's something
story.
to keep in mind.
Right.
You can already go to that height, so any concerns?
How high were we
But-
thinking for that spot?
So
38.
four stories, so that'd be 48. right?
48.
Okay.
So that's
48?
significant. But this brings up a good point, you're talking hotels, like apartment buildings, right? 3- and 4-story apartment buildings. Those have been identified as a need that could really help with housing. Yeah, so I think, looking, it's these chances to kind of secure, the development being apartment buildings rather than a big house, I don't know what goes into that, but city-owned land, I would think. You have, or what was that we talked about last time, you can evaluate like plans to develop, I forget the word we used. Anyway, yeah, I mean, the big thing with building height, yes, it would allow hotels and that would ease there, but, the chance to build apartment complexes, and it seems like you need to go 3 or even 4 stories for a developer to really be interested in doing that. So I think this is great to look at these areas where the view, wouldn't be as affected. I mean, I think that Betty Cato one is really good. Like a lot of these are good. Against the mountain,
Betty
down in the
Cato is
historic
close to.
district.
I'm sorry.
Rhonda?
Are we just talking about a specific area right now that we would approve or consider? Or are we looking at all of these as potential 40-footer over?
Yeah, any places that the commission would like to propose.
Okay. Well, with that, I don't necessarily agree with the Betty Cato area that's going along the water, or going towards the water, that would be going west. So, I would suggest a lower profile there, since it's kind of encroaching on the waterfront area. Maybe on the other side of the street, on the east side of the street, that I would consider going higher.
Are you thinking of the compost pile area? That's where that's always been.
That's our city-owned piece.
Yeah.
And its own resource
it's,
management.
It would be south of there,
Oh, just on the other side.
yeah.
Well, there's our lot, and then south of Betty Cato, there's 2 long ones that are bisected by Nash Road.
Right.
So you're referring to the east side of those properties would be more appropriate than the west side.
For taller buildings, yes,
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
So, other than what Courtney just mentioned just a few minutes ago, the only reason we're talking about this is because a couple hotel people, businessmen, wanted more room to make more money. None of the public, except for that one apartment building that we just found out about, has ever said they want to go above 3 stories. In fact, all of the majority of the surveys said they either wanted 3 stories or less. So really, this topic is only started because a hotel wanted to make more money. So I want to keep that in mind, that most of the public wants 3 or less. So do we want to do what the public said and just do a standard proper 3 so that the hotel builders don't have to work extra hard to put their
Fire suppression.
fire suppression in the walls? They can put it in the ceiling like a proper 3-story, raising our height from 34 to 38 overall, and just leave it. Because
Make it easier.
that gets what the public said they wanted. Majority wanted 3 or less. That gives,
From the survey, yeah.
from the survey, that gives a proper 3 so that they don't have to spend extra money putting in fire suppression in the walls.
Yes,
What-
John?
What do you think about what I said about the apartment complex opportunity, 4 stories for housing?
Yeah.
I don't see anything wrong with a 3-story apartment, and I don't really think I think we're gonna see more commercial hotels versus apartments. And I don't think there's a way for us to say what's going to, like, change what's gonna happen. We set the height, and they can do whatever they want, and the majority are going to build the most profitable thing, which is a hotel.
But city-owned land?
Well,
It'll be sold.
it'll be sold,
It'll be sold to somebody.
leased.
We can't build.
yeah.
So some developer will have to do that, whether it's a hotelier or a private guy, but the city can't build anything.
What was that term? Plans, right? That we can choose, or the city can choose? We talked about this term last time. We kind of
the
got
Give
about
me a
it.
ball.
Yeah.
Give me a ball.
Hints.
Doing an RFP
An
or
RFP.
Yeah, what does that stand for?
Request for
request
proposal.
proposal.
Yeah,
and that would
RFPs.
pertain.
It's hard to tell people what they can and can't do on land if they're leasing it. Like, it's just, no.
Yeah, and that could pertain to city-owned land. In this case of the developer that contacted us about property they now own next to the snow dump. Yeah, they just own it and they can do what they want with it. Once we raise the height or not.
The other thing we could do is do within a certain distance of the hillside is 48. No matter all the way around.
which a lot of those spots is probably hard to put a hotel in.
Might be hard to put an apartment in there too. It's a
True.
lot of rock.
Right.
Well, a certain distance, like, so you could do like west of First Street.
Right.
No. I'm throwing out ideas.
Yeah,
Okay,
30, yeah,
I want to
30.
It's
clarify.
private property.
So this person, would they like to come forward and maybe we could say some of these areas could be considered for 48 feet, 4-story, to accommodate a 4-story structure per a conditional use permit? Because I'm getting the impression this is kind of, he's formulating some possibilities or inquiring about some possibilities, or would he jump on it today if he knew that he can go up 4 stories, or she, or whoever the entity is?
Yeah, I mean, the developers who own this property are seriously considering and planning to build multi-unit apartment buildings there. I mean, like I said, up to 12 units, so not something huge, but multiples of those. And a variance would be what they could apply for to request a higher height. However, the way our code is written, a variance is for only limited situations that are very different from surrounding properties, and just asking for a taller height to put in an apartment building that, someone on the lot next to them also has that same ability to request a variance doesn't really, it's not going to be a variance that the commission could approve given the requirements in our code for a variance.
So we have to, the protocol then is to identify properties that are say, okay, we would allow a 4-story / 48-foot structure here, that would be okay.
Right, if the commission developed a building height overlay. Allowing a higher
Yeah.
height, yeah.
So can we start like 1 or 2 at a time and keep continuing working on this, or? I mean, there's a diverse options here that they presented us with, so. I don't have a problem with with that area that's being considered to make that 4-story, but that's just one property. I can't.
Yeah, I don't want to pick one property here and there. That gets into trouble because then you're picking somebody's lot that can do something that's worth more.
How do we
You're
go
giving
about, how do we
advantage
best
to
go
one
about
person.
that? I mean, like just tossing this around, oh,
No.
we got someone in the.
Yeah, just, I don't have a ball in this game, but
Yep,
just
yep.
2 things to throw into it.
Sure.
for fun. the survey's incomplete, so it's not fair to use that data yet. And two, what if we're not hearing from developers because they know the codes are so restrictive? And so those developers aren't even coming to the community saying, we want to build a 4-story, condominium unit or, some kind of housing unit because the restrictions are in place and it's not worth bringing up the conversation. So I just wanted to put those two things into the conversation.
That's a good point.
When does the survey end again?
May 31st, and we can give you some updated information. I just want to clarify, the survey from that point in time, right, 3 stories obviously was the highest. 1 to 2 kind of equaled the 4 to 5 plus the other. And the other, if you read most of those comments, do talk about like overlays or certain areas of town. So it's kind of, majority's 3, and it's a pretty even split of less versus going up on that. And just to the comment, yeah, we don't receive many comments from the public about wanting to build personal structures, but I think the survey is showing that there is a need for housing, multi-unit apartment complexes, and so I don't think the public understands like what height they need to be to promote developers to come in. And while we did have the hotel perspective here, we have been in contact with multiple apartment complex developers, and that's just the feedback. It's just too restrictive, and you go up to 3 stories because of the square footage per floor. You would need an elevator, and so that's why the 4th story is advantageous, because if you're going to have an elevator, that's an additional expense, and so if you have a 4th floor, that helps with that additional expense. And so would they jump on this if it was 48 feet and they could do it? Maybe. I don't want to like speak for them, we're not that far in the conversations, but if you go only to 3 feet, then maybe you're starting to risk, hey, we've allowed them to go up to 38 feet for a true 3-story building, but maybe that's not as advantageous or profitable for an apartment complex, so then I am going to do a hotel versus a unit. And so, and to your point, Nathaniel, it's hard because you could put in the code, write it in a way that hopefully promotes development, but at the end of the day, you're right, you can't decide, and so it's kind of hard. You got to think about it in that way, but I hope you don't think about it in a way that just restricts any type of change, because sometimes you just got to roll with it and see what happens. But that's why we have these conversations. So yeah, that is a tough one.
Give it a try in the way that like the view shed is still protected, and we do these overlays where then developers can see, oh, they're up to 48 feet in Seward. Very interesting. And then we could see what comes of it.
Is this something that we need to discuss after that survey is completed, so we can use that data to make a sound decision?
What does the community envision for Seward? That's what the comp plan's all about, and we're part of it.
Yeah, and in the comp plan update, because we're doing a lot of it in-house, it's going to be a long process, and so I don't know. I would encourage the commission to continue this conversation based on the joint work session. That was the direction, was to come back with some ideas, and so I think we'll keep kind of putting it on the agenda just based on that direction. But I can follow up with our bosses too and see like where if that direction's changing or whatnot. But
Well, I think they did give us some direction at the joint work session to work on this height plan. They didn't shut us down, and they wanted us to look at some different overlays. And I do wish that we had more public input, but again, they're not the developers either, and but maybe the real estate companies or whatever can tell us what what they're hearing, or are they people just knocking on the door and say, oh, I can't do that, I'm out of here. I think that's happening a lot, and we need to somehow let people know that we're open for business and building up our housing issue, or addressing our housing issue with whatever we can do to accommodate that. I would like to continue, like you said, keep this conversation on the table and look at that. But so, are we going to accept? Are we okay with accepting some 4-story buildings around town?
Where are you speaking of around town?
Well, there was a conversation going Hemlock or Sea Line Drive north, and was that idea?
That's true.
And not Phoenix South or Van Buren South, and not in the historic district.
Right.
Now, would that historic district in South Van Buren, would we leave it how it is or allow proper, a 38 for proper 3-story?
I think we need to do 3-story. We need to make it more building, more conducive for the builders to
It's
adequately
already
do 3-story.
3-story. It's just 3-story more economical.
Is what?
It's already 3-story, but 3-story more economical.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
I think
So it needs a few more
38
feet.
makes sense,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I think that should get cleaned up right away. Get that cleaned up.
What I think is interesting, driving around downtown, we have the Edgewater, 3 stories plus a basement. We have Van Gilder, 3 stories plus a basement. We have Hotel Seward, 3 stories plus a basement. We have Glacier View Apartments, 3 stories. I don't know about their basement, I assume they have one. But these are all structures that are within the 34-foot height restriction. And they look 3 stories to me, you know? I don't know how they did anything with their fire suppression or elevators. They apparently were able to accommodate that and stay within our 30-foot height. So I personally don't see why we have to go with 48 feet. That just sounds out of character for the Seward that I love.
Well, that's downtown, we're talking 38 feet potentially, not 48, 48. I mean, maybe would we help, like, as we start to look at specific areas, like where does 48 make the most sense? Like, where would you start with an overlay? Like, we're okay with this, you know, as you start down that road. 'Cause we're not
So-
considering 48 in the historic district, I don't think.
I hope not.
I mean, maybe
No.
against the mountain, but I
If
don't
I-
see anywhere.
Just from my recap of the last couple
Yeah.
conversations, it sounded like this area downtown, you all were on board with 34 feet, keeping
Yeah.
it.
Keeping
and
it
then
that, yeah, I don't want to change
once you
that.
get north of the water, then deciding where would we allow a 38-foot and where would we allow a 48-foot overlay.
Yeah.
And so
So
that's
let's
kind of where I kind
We
of
left
felt
off.
we left it at.
I think we should, well, come out with, I guess it can't be hard yet because we're going to continue to talk about this for a little bit, I'm assuming. But a line where it might change from 34. And then what that change would be. And then we could talk about a potential line for another change.
That's a good,
Like instead of talking about where this height and that height,
Right.
let's start at the lowest. Where do we want to keep it what it's at? 34. And where are we comfortable considering a change? And then that considering a change spot, let's talk about what change we're comfortable with, and we can move forward from there.
Well, times have changed, buildings changed, codes have changed, and to make an economic build of a 3-story place, I think we heard from builders that have been through this at 38 feet was,
34.
they said 38 feet. The
Oh,
34 was
Yeah.
a compromise and hard
You said
to work
38.
around. Am I correct? Was it 38, was it 36 or 38? I think it was 38 is what they
For a
needed.
true 3-story building,
Yeah.
from like all the conversations,
Was
building inspector, like
Ideally
38 was
40.
kind of,
38 ideally 40
Yeah.
maybe, but, so I think that needs to get, like I said, gets cleaned up for that type of building, 34 for a housing, and then let's look at 4-story building, higher building going on outside past sea line maybe.
But south of Van Buren, we're staying 34.
Right.
sure, you know, to move it forward. Yeah.
And we also
Well,
have.
that means that this south of Van Buren, that means the hotel that we were just considering, that wouldn't be viable for them.
Well, it'd be viable as they proposed it at 34 feet. The reason that one didn't get put through is because of the parking issue.
It's also in the historic district. Keep in mind, the harbor has a little quirk where
True.
they were trying to protect the view by restricting it to, I believe, 26 feet. Does that sound like the right number? And it's the harbor uplands, the north half, and then around, including the harbor master's office, and then the parking lot, Peanut Tours, I bet. And then we have the yacht club, I think, is in that zone, and it's over the height, I think. I
I'm
don't know,
I'm not aware of the height of that building, but
three-story.
Yeah.
Three-story over 24 feet is kind of hard. But we do have that, and that was an attempt by previous commissions to try to not have a wall of tall buildings next to the waterfront. And I think we all agree that's a good goal to not block the view as much as we can help.
Yeah.
So are we also thinking about rezones? When we do this overlay thinking, are we thinking, oh, this would be a good place for a hotel or a housing, but guess what, zone industrial? Do we still consider it? Or do we say we can only do this in certain zones?
I think zoning's a different topic.
So just look at the whole city limits,
Based on the
regardless of
viewshed.
the,
Yeah.
right, regardless of the zoning.
And then I think the nature of the overlay is important too. I mean, I would guess, no experience with this, you want to be just pretty like obvious with it, like not breaking up, okay, here's a little one, here's a little one, here's a little one. You're just bringing like big chunks of like this area can change.
Yeah.
Right, is that we'd like to make it nice and clear and kind of, and I think we just simplify it and base it on viewshed, right? And that's what we're down to, and like safety, like a good point about the planes there, that wouldn't be viewshed necessarily. I mean, I think we could move forward on that in 14 minutes, right? To kind of evaluate some areas based on viewshed.
So you're gonna call it a view shed overlay, pretty much?
I mean, yeah, I mean, where would we start, you know?
Because that's what's driving the train initially.
I think that's it, right? What are the other criteria to overlays?
Congestion. Got to consider location of these many dense buildings.
Yeah, but don't all our other code things take care of that, or?
I don't know, we haven't so far.
They start to take care of it.
Yeah.
But what does the commission think about, number one, continuing this conversation, because it's important and there's a lot to think about. Number two, starting with Nathaniel's idea of starting low. Okay, where don't we want it? Knock it off. Van Buren South, no. The harbor thing, don't change that. How about north of Van Buren? Where would you like it? How about across the bay? Where would it be appropriate? Would you like to consider sort of chunking it out in those regions?
Yeah,
And say where?
yeah, that'd be good, because I just need to get oriented, and it's nice to,
And don't consider the zoning at this time, just
Right.
consider
Area.
Just the height.
primary
Yeah.
concerns about viewshed, congestion,
Yeah.
if that's
Yep.
a thing we should worry about, height, if it's airport safety. So we are public health, safety, and welfare.
Mhm.
So, but that might help us focus.
It's a
Yeah.
process
Yes.
of elimination too.
And then
Yeah,
if we
It's
could,
a
exactly.
big thing, yeah.
if we could draft a map with overlays, like here's what we're thinking, potential, and kind of get that out to the public, that could maybe bring in a lot more feedback, like, oh,
Yeah.
actually, there's a detail about this, or, you know, this is great.
Chair Crystal, I do have a quick idea. When we did the tabletop work session before and some of those things, we might be able to do the same thing, that we're sort of all looking at
Yeah,
it
that
as
was
we
good.
did. Remember that tabletop we did before?
Yeah.
That might be helpful, and then we can just sort of line out the areas that we think of, and they're able to, then we can fully discuss those areas, and then everybody's sort of working off the same sheet of music, so to speak.
I like that.
Right.
If can that be sort of done? Next time we have a work session?
We all draw our own overlays and.
No, we come prepared with our own ideas
That's
for
good,
that
yeah.
specifically, and then we can argue it out then.
yeah.
And a further focus, what height are we talking?
Right.
So
Yes.
When we're moving around town, we're visualizing the bulk fuel tanks are 40 feet. Across the bay, it's like, oh my gosh, 115 feet. What building height are we going to be focusing on for apartments? And then I think hotels, I think they're separate.
You
Yeah.
need some
Oh,
technical
absolutely.
data on that too, I feel.
Also, keep in mind that 34, 38, whatever, based on our code, isn't the height of the tippy top.
Right,
No.
right.
Facades and,
Yeah.
and
So
then
it will be-
elevator shafts.
It will be
and-
taller than that.
Yeah, but they're not,
Something to
they're
keep
not
in
the whole
mind.
structure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's what we're talking about, like the comfortable
Yep.
3-story, which sounds like 38, and then the 4-story, which we were saying 50, now it's 48, but that's what we're talking about
Yeah.
still.
So 48 for hotels.
For
And
4 stories.
for
48.
four-story.
For 4
Yeah,
stories.
We'll figure it out.
Okay,
And you need 38 for 3 stories.
38 for a
Yeah.
true three-story.
Yeah.
Good. I would like to adjourn this work session, so we have a little time for a break before our next meeting. Anything more from the public? Appreciate you coming.
I'll just introduce myself, Stephanie Mullane, new president to the chamber, and then, I don't know if Jenna wants to introduce herself, but.
Jenna Peterson, I'm the vice president.
Thanks for coming. And I believe Commissioner Hornseth had one more parting comment.
Yeah, I know 48 sounds like a lot, and I just wanted to say 48 still, just from a human perspective and a walkable city's perspective, is still, if you've ever read Jane Jacobs, I was trying to remember what book it was I read of hers, but basically the book she's well known for, talks about 4 stories is kind of her like max that keeps a feel of a city intact. And so even 4 stories might seem tall to us, but it's not the end of the world if you talk to her. So.
We are at the end of the world. Okay, I'm going to adjourn the meeting, and we'll see everyone here at 7.